Now then, it's the interview everyone wanted, a sit-down chat with the President of the United States, Donald Trump.
Piers Morgan got the global scoop. In fact, he's been sitting here on his phone. He's been soaking up all the admiration.
I've actually been gloating against these two.
Brilliant.
Here's a taste of what was said.
It's been an incredible trip. Last night was really quite unbelievable with the Queen, because that is a great woman.
This Meghan Markle business.
Essentially, I didn't know she was nasty about me. So I said, but you know what? She's doing a good job. I hope she enjoys her life.
Could you imagine actually doing a trade deal with Britain with someone like Jeremy Corbyn as a leader?
I don't think it was appropriate to meet him, but I would. I certainly would. I'd have no problem with it.
Would you, as the American president, see that as a deal breaker if none of the NHS was on the table?
I don't see it being on the table. That's something that I would not consider part of trade. That's not trade.
Who's the British Trump? Is it Boris or Nigel Farage?
I guess, well, Nigel's another one. I like Nigel.
Who's the British Trump?
I don't want to say. I don't want to destroy
I
don't want to destroy anybody's career.
If you had a...
you know.
Piers joins us now, and it's lovely to see you.
Lovely to see you.
Congratulations on a brilliant interview.
Thank you.
How does it come about? I mean, you're kind of friends with him now. Do you text him to arrange, or you're coming over?
I used to have a lot of regular contact with him. It goes back to when I appeared on Celebrity Apprentice back in 2008. I've known him a long time. And I won the first season of that in America, and then I went back on as his boardroom advisor most years after that, doing a couple of episodes. So I got to know him very well. Then I went to CNN in New York, and I interviewed him maybe 35, 40 times. So I built up a very good relationship with him. And suddenly this guy that I consider quite a good friend becomes President of the United States. Yeah. And it's quite surreal, even now. You know, when I see him, we're friends, and yet he's the most powerful man on earth. So it's a strange dynamic.
He obviously has some bulldogs around him who want to make sure that you keep within your time. Yeah. How does it work? Because I know that it was the Secret Service that tipped you off as to how long you have.
Yeah, I mean, he has an amazing schedule, as we saw. He's been incredibly busy. I got told you got 15 minutes straight, and then you enter the world of the President of the United States. It's the most secure. We were down in the Churchill war rooms, Secret Service everywhere, armed police, everywhere is in lockdown for hours before. I didn't know until Sunday. I definitely got the interview. And, you know, I never take it for granted. I'm always very grateful. I ended up getting the only television interview either here or in America for this visit, so a huge honour for me. But then a Secret Service guy came over and he said, so you got like 20, 25 minutes? I went, have I? So I've got a bit of wriggle room here.
But his head of press was telling you got 15.
I think what they do is every interview is 15 unless the president's enjoying himself. And if he's enjoying himself, which he normally does with me, because I don't go in there to try and make a name for myself by playing gotcha with him or metaphorically clubbing him over the head, because A, the interview would last 3 minutes and he'd be kicked out, and B, I'd never interview him again. I see a potential here where Trump could be president for another 6 years.
So does it mean you have to go soft on him?
No, I don't think so. I think if you watch the whole interview this morning, I think there are parts when I'm soft with him, parts where we're having a laugh together, and parts on things like climate change and gun control and his ban on transgender people in the US military, where I really go quite tough on him. I think you can be all those things in an interview. What I won't do is be rude to him, and I won't be too bombastic against him just to make a name for myself. I don't need to do that. This guy is the President of the United States, and he's in this country, let's not forget, to commemorate the D-Day anniversary. That's why he's here. And if you don't like Trump, fine. He's a polarising character. But do respect the office, particularly when I think he's on a state visit for that reason.
Well, let's talk about some of the topics that you brought up. You pressed him on the topic of the NHS being part of a trade deal, and he clarified that a little bit. Let's have a look at what was said.
Would you, as the American president, see that as a deal breaker if none of the NHS was on the table?
I don't see it being on the table. Somebody asked me a question today, and I say everything's up for negotiation, because everything is. But I don't see that being... That's something that I would not consider part of trade. That's not trade.
That's interesting, because prior to that, not much, because you'd watch the...
That's 30 minutes.
You'd watch the press conference.
He'd walked from the press conference where he'd said everything's up for negotiation, including the National Health Service.
It's on the table.
Right? Then he walks through, they go around the war rooms with Theresa May, a conversation is had with somebody, maybe it's Mrs May, maybe by then his people had realised the immediate reaction to what he said in the press conference was fury, not just from the Labour side that he would expect, but from the Conservative people running for leader too. So he realised it's a hot potato.
So somebody had said to him on that 30-minute walk round, you have to roll back.
I'm pretty sure they did. And it's a very significant rollback, because we cannot have a trade deal in this country that involves selling off the NHS to American pharmaceutical companies. We already do some business with those companies, and we want to carry on doing that. I'm sure that can be part of a trade deal, but he's right to take it off the table as a tradable commodity.
So is that the way it works then? So he will be a firebrand, he will say something, and in response to a question, shoot from the hip, and then he'll walk away, and someone will come up to him and say, you have to roll back on that.
The guy sold real estate in New York for 5 decades. What is their tactic, right? It's, I want 150 million for this building that's worth 80. The others go, well, you've got to be joking. And he freaks them out. And they end up paying 90 and they're grateful. That's how he's done business all his life. I think he, probably quite deliberately, they raise the spectre of the NHS, everyone freaks out, and then they rein back, and then they was probably happy to give them something else. So he's a brilliant negotiator. He wrote a book called The Art of the Deal. This is Trump's core DNA. He's a business guy, and I think he wants to give us a good trade deal. But remember, he's America first. What we need in this country is a new leader of the country who will put Britain first as well in that trade deal and negotiate a great deal. I think the real problem with the Brexit situation is we haven't had good enough negotiators, and we've ended up with a bad deal. I think Trump would have been much tougher with the EU.
You pushed him on climate change. Prince Charles pushed him on climate change.
Really interesting. So Charles had 15 minutes too. So everyone seems to be given 15 minutes. Charles got 90 minutes with... remember, Charles is the future King of England, and he had 90 minutes with the President of the United States.
Good for him, though, to use that.
And he said he spent most of it talking, said Trump, which was pretty rich coming from him. But Prince Charles clearly gave him a really tough time about climate change. And good, because I did a bit too, because the President of the United States has a duty of care to this planet, which at the moment I don't think he takes seriously enough.
Well, he said China, India, Russia, they don't have good air or water, and there's a mutual responsibility that they don't do it, claiming that America.
And by the way, he's absolutely right. I mean, this is a collective.
America is still in the top 5 biggest polluters on the planet.
Absolutely, and he knows that. And I think he's right. I think his problem with the Paris Agreement is that he believes it's financially punitive to America. And again, it comes back to what is Trump's driving force? It's business. He thinks it's bad business for America incorporated this deal as it stands. I think he's coming round to being persuaded about climate change being a real and dangerous threat. But he wants to be in there. Well, I agree. He wants to be in there with the Chinese, with the Indians, with the other big gas-guzzling countries of the world, and to come into it, as he would see, fairly.
What was brilliant for you was in the press call beforehand, nothing was mentioned about the royals, Meghan Markle. So that was all on the... That was a gift. You were like,
you're watching the press conference. I'm thinking, if somebody asks about Meghan Markle, the Queen, Winston Churchill, whatever, I'm dead in the water. I'm sitting here with all my questions will be completely old and useless. He clarified the Meghan Markle thing. Yeah. She said nasty things about me, but I don't think she's nasty,
Well, let's have a look at what you said about that.
I said, wow, I didn't know she was nasty. I wasn't referring to her, she's nasty. I said she was nasty about me. And essentially, I didn't know she was nasty about me. So I said, but you know what? She's doing a good job. I hope she enjoys her life.
Harry didn't have a problem with you? Because there were rumours that he didn't want to talk to you and all that.
No, just the opposite. In fact, he spent a lot of time talking to Ivanka and talking to my family. I went up. He couldn't have been nicer. Couldn't have been nicer.
What do you think of him?
I think he's great.
So
very diplomatic, Donald Trump, isn't it?
I mean, very diplomatic.
He's been, this whole few days.
Because Meghan Markle, let's be clear, she had been pretty nasty about Trump, not just on television.
I think
she called him divisive misogynist and so on. When I met her in my local pub, she was pretty scathing about Trump. So he knows that. And I think he was making the point that I didn't say she's nasty. I just said she said nasty things. She did. So, let's be realistic about that. But I think he's been very diplomatic on this trip. What I loved, actually, was the bit about the Queen, because there's a wonderful story that Donald Trump, age 6, when television had just become a thing, his mother was a huge monarchist, born and raised in Scotland until she was 18, Mary, went to New York, sat Donald down, age 6, and they watched the coronation together in 1953. 66 years later, the same Donald walks through into Buckingham Palace to a state banquet in his honour as the President of the United States with the same Queen on the throne. And I thought that was a wonderful thing. And he said, I've been through a lot of big things, the inauguration, winning the presidency. He said, when I walked through, I got how big it was.
Walking through that picture gallery beside the Queen, going into a state banquet, there must have been an enormous amount of pride for him. Not only, I mean, obviously, personally, but knowing that he got the big one. This is going to look great.
He said, he said everyone was saying, can he handle it? And I was like, of course I can. I'm Donald Trump, and his normal sort of ego was running riot. But he said, but actually, when the moment came, and I walked into those rooms and I saw the Queen with her tiara, and he realised, and he said also he thought about his mum. You know, he thought about his mum up there watching down and seeing her boy being honoured by the Queen. I think the Queen's had a really good effect on Donald Trump.
What was also interesting is that he'd said that the Queen, here we go, I made a promise to her not to tell anyone what we spoke about. I have great respect for her.
See if he keeps that promise.
Well, do we think the Queen said, Donald, you have to keep this quiet?
Actually, he said they spoke for 90 minutes at the banquet. I mean, he sat next to it, so he probably did. The Queen, I know from having...
Well, he had tea at that afternoon.
We've all met the Queen. If you speak to her privately... You haven't met her?
No.
Oh, well, Phillip and I have. We hobnob with the royals. I met her a few times, and she'll talk about... I mean, I remember a hilarious time once when I was at Windsor Castle looking out over the gardens, and I was in a group with the Queen, and I said, Your Majesty, do you like the garden parties or not? And she said, well, Mr Morgan, let me put it like this to you. How would you like 12,000 complete strangers trampling over your lawns? So she has a great sense of humour.
So do you think it was knowing that he does shoot from the hip and he's liable to say anything that the palace might have thought? Because when you do have a conversation with the Queen, it is good form not to say what you've spoken about.
I think it's been made very clear to him. And, in fact, both times when he saw her at Windsor, last time on the last trip, I was on Air Force One with him immediately afterwards, and again, he didn't reveal anything. He's learned you don't repeat what the royals tell you. And I think he recognises that he's got a very divisive, polarising reputation here and in America. This has been a brilliant week for Donald Trump. Putting aside what you think of him personally, this has been a PR triumph, and also for the royals, because they've been seen at a time of really fractious tension in this country about Brexit and Trump, that actually the Queen has shown everybody that whatever your personal feelings about stuff, you can have the old-fashioned British values of politeness and civility and actually be warm to people whilst disagreeing with them.
When will you do that?
I'm working on my civility.
Well done. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Lovely to see you.
Nice of you to have me on.